Okay, well, welcome everyone to the first Friday lecture for the month of May. Today's speaker is Noah Chafets, and his title is Accounting for Taste, David Hume on Authority in Aesthetic Judgment. Please note that this presentation is also being recorded, and it will be available on the Graham School YouTube channel if you want to watch it later. Also, please be aware that you will not be able to unmute your microphones during this presentation as a courtesy to our speaker. You will be able to ask questions in the chat box. You can do so at any time during the presentation. Just type your question in the chat and I will keep track of them, and then I will pose the questions to Noah at the question and answer period at the end of the lecture. Everybody, as I said, will be muted during the presentation except for Noah. Noah and I will be able to see your video, but won't be able to hear you. So if you choose to leave your video on or turn it off, it is at your discretion. Others will be able to see you as well. Noah's video will be spotlighted mostly during the presentation. And so the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. Today's lecture is being sponsored by the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults at the University of Chicago's Graham School. And my name is Zoe Eisenman, and I'm the Director of Academics at the Graham School, as well as the former Cyril O'Huel Chair of the Basic Program. Kendall Sharp, who is the current Cyril O'Huel Chair, was not able to be here today, so I'm subbing for him. Before I properly introduce our speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the Basic Program, the Graham School, and our upcoming courses and events. The Basic Program is a four-year certificate program at the University of Chicago's Graham School of Continuing Studies. The Graham School offers an array of programs beside the Basic Program. Since 1946, we've offered our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum based on the principle that there is no substitute for direct engagement with big ideas in their original texts. Through focused discussion, our classes provide direct encounters with some of the great works of classical Western culture in a dedicated community of adult learners led by experienced University of Chicago educated instructors. Currently, most of our classes take place remotely. Registration for summer courses is now open online. Next month, First Friday lectures will happen on June 3rd, and the speaker will be Basic Program instructor Cynthia Rutz. Cindy's title will be Homer's Humanity, Moments of Grace in the Iliad. You can find more information and register for First Friday lectures and all other events on our website, and you can see the URL there. Some other events coming up in May. We have our annual Basic Program meet and greet next Thursday, May 12th at 4:30. This is going to be an in-person event downtown at the Gleacher Center. Graham also has some upcoming lectures and panels throughout the month of May. You can see the Graham website for details of lectures and discussions on topics as diverse as the afterlife of mass incarceration, the history of the antebellum Constitution, and the historiography of the Renaissance. As I mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded. The recording will be available to current and former students on the Graham YouTube channel early next week. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Noah Chafets. Noah Chafets holds a BA in philosophy from Vassar College and recently received his PhD from the university's Committee on Social Thought. His dissertation concerned desire and motivation in Plato's Gorgias and Republic. He has taught high school students in Boston and Shanghai and taught undergraduates at the university, primarily in core sequences in the humanities and social sciences, for a decade before joining the Basic Program. His interests are well represented by the texts in the Basic Program's curriculum, but also extend to contemporary ethics and practical philosophy, aesthetics, and film. And now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Noah.
All right. Thanks so much, Zoe, for that introduction. Thank you to all of you for, I guess, coming here. I don't know what to say, but attending today, attending on Zoom in any case. I hope I am well visible to all of you. I'm gonna get the PowerPoint presentation going and then get started. So bear with me just 1 second, and please bear with me through all of the slight glitches that are almost inevitable when one shares a screen on Zoom and gets through this. So here we go. Let's see. Imagine that tomorrow morning you receive an email with the following announcement. One new text will be added to the Basic Program's core curriculum, and the faculty would like your input as to which text it should be. My hunch is that most of you, basic program students and faculty, would have an opinion ready to go. Some of you may be shouting those opinions at your computers and phones right now, and you're all muted, so why not? Shout away. I myself would have to choose between a handful of texts, but they would all be by David Hume, the 18th century Scottish philosopher, essayist, and historian. I don't consider myself a Humean, as some contemporary philosophers do, and I find plenty to criticize in Hume's work. In fact, he published a handful of views that are downright abhorrent. But what I think of as the core of Hume's writings, the writings that are still widely published, taught, and written about, are, for me, a joy to read and think with. These works are ambitious and engaging, richly observed, and profoundly challenging. I haven't read another philosopher who's so good at identifying our intellectual blind spots, the big load-bearing thoughts that we take to be true, even though we lack any articulate or defensible reason for doing so. Hume saw deeply into psychology, into morals, politics, and culture, into causation and natural scientific reasoning, into religion, and into aesthetics, which is the topic of the essay that I'll discuss today, of the standard of taste. I've introduced Hume by way of this little fantasy that someday I might advocate for his place in the four-year curriculum, because Of the Standard of Taste is essential reading for anyone who takes part in maintaining or revising a canon of great books. And likewise for anyone who's skeptical about the very idea of a canon of great books. The judgment that a certain book is a great book is always, to some extent, a matter of taste. Whether it's possible for a canon of great books to represent anything more than the personal preferences of an arbitrarily defined group of people hangs on our answers to the questions that Hume considers in his essay. Are there rules or standards by which to decide matters of taste? Can any person make a rightful claim to authority in matters of taste? If so, in virtue of what qualities does she possess this authority? And how does she acquire them? In colloquial terms, we might think of these as who gets to decide questions. I've heard many variations of who gets to decide questions, who gets to decide what people are allowed to say, who gets to decide who lives and dies, who gets to decide what's normal and abnormal, and so forth. In my experience, when people raise some version of the who gets to decide question, they generally don't mean it as a question exactly, but rather as a definitive objection. They take it to be obvious that the question has no good answer, that nobody has the authority to decide the matter in question, so nobody should get to decide it. Hume treats the who gets to decide question in matters of taste as a live one, which deserves careful consideration. Who gets to decide which works of art are good and which are bad? Or, in Hume's language, who gets to decide the beauty or deformity of works of art? I should note that Hume does not mean by deformed or deformity what someone who used these words today would mean by them. And in fact, the same is true for the words beautiful and beauty. Rather, he uses the word beauty as a general term that refers to anything that is good in works of art, and the word deformity to refer to anything that is bad. For Hume, the beauties of a work are its good qualities, and its deformities are its bad qualities. And I will adopt Hume's terms for the duration of this lecture. My aims today are to explain how Hume frames his questions and answers them, to provide some thoughts of my own about where his views are especially valuable and where they're lacking, and to tie Hume's project in Of the Standard of Taste to the work of caring for canons of great books. Hume begins his essay by recognizing the great variety of tastes. Even people with the same education, with the same manners and the same beliefs about a wide range of things are liable to disagree in their judgments of taste. That is, in their judgments about which works of visual art, narrative art, music, poetry, history, rhetoric, philosophy, and so forth are good and bad, and in what respects they're good and bad. And people who are separated by time, geography, or culture disagree in matters of taste with great regularity. Often enough, we denounce tastes that diverge greatly from our own tastes, from our own. But of course, our own tastes are just as liable to be denounced in turn. However confident we may be in our tastes, attending to the diversity of tastes tends to humble us, to make us more hesitant to claim that our tastes must be right and good, and any divergent tastes wrong and bad. Hume notes that one strain of philosophical thinking suggests we should abandon any hope of adjudicating between judgments of taste wherever they disagree. Judgments of taste, according to this strain of thinking, are really expressions of sentiment. They are not opinions, that is, determinations of the understanding, as Hume has it. Opinions are fallible because they refer to something beyond themselves and generally to matters of fact. The opinion that the University of Chicago was founded in 1890 is true, and any opinion to the contrary, say that the university was founded in 1880 or 1900, is false. Sentiments, on the other hand, do not represent the objects in response to which they arise. If the same sentiment arises habitually in a person with respect to the same object, then this is how the object makes her feel. But the sentiment is not an opinion about the object, so it can be neither true nor false, neither more accurate nor less. Take cilantro, for instance. It tastes like soap to some people and like parsley to others, maybe with a hint of citrus. Very few of us are inclined to argue that one of these groups of people has a true taste of cilantro, that people in this group taste cilantro the way it really is, and that the other group has a false taste of cilantro. Argument seems inappropriate in a case like this. We're generally content to conclude that cilantro just tastes one way to the one group and another way to the other group, and that neither group's taste better captures some fact of the matter about cilantro. When people from each group say how cilantro tastes, they are merely identifying a sensation or feeling they have when they eat cilantro. Hume explains that those who think that we cannot settle our differences in judgments of taste believe that all such differences are like our differences over the taste of cilantro. If some of us say that a given book or movie or dance performance is beautiful, and others that it is boring or shallow or repulsive, it makes no sense to argue over which of us is right, because we're not really making claims about the book or movie or dance performance, but simply expressing how it makes each of us feel. Such expressions cannot be adjudicated in the way that opinions can. Hence, our judgments of taste, and our tastes more generally, are all equal. Hume concedes that this sounds like common sense, but he is dissatisfied with this line of thinking, and he rejects it. His grounds for doing so unfold only over the course of his essay, but he offers a simple reason early on. He shares the intuition that our judgments of taste depend on sentiment, but he observes that it's equally intuitive that some artists and some works of art are just better than others. If someone claims that his 3-year-old finger paintings are as beautiful as anything in the Art Institute of Chicago, or that Baby Shark is as good as the Goldberg variations, or that the movie Troy is a match for the Iliad, Hume thinks we'd be right to dismiss these claims as absurd. With this observation in mind, Hume declares that, quote, "It is natural for us to seek a standard of taste, a rule by which the various sentiments of men may be reconciled, at least a decision afforded confirming one sentiment and condemning another." To begin, Hume tries to determine the derivation and the form of what he calls the rules of beauty, that is, the principles by which a beautiful work is made or by which it is correctly recognized as beautiful. He dismisses the possibility that the rules of beauty can be determined by abstract reasoning. Rather, they must be derived from experience. Excuse me. My video keeps stopping and starting, as it always does when I share a screen, and I'm sure will continue to do so. Please forgive the brief interruptions. Where was I? Okay. Nor can the rules of beauty be universal, rather, the rules of beauty must be derived from experience. Nor can the rules of beauty be universal or entirely precise rules, but only general rules. This is in part because of the nature of aesthetic objects. As Hume puts it, many of the beauties of poetry and even of eloquence are founded on falsehood and fiction, on hyperboles, metaphors, and an abuse or perversion of terms from their natural meaning. By this, he seems to mean that because an essential part of writing beautifully involves breaking rules that govern strictly literal communication, we can't formulate a second precise set of rules governing how to break the first set artfully. The other reason Hume gives as to why the rules of beauty are general rather than precise is that these rules capture not what is beautiful in some absolute and timeless sense. Rather, they are, quote, general observations concerning what has been universally found to please in all countries and in all ages, unquote. Hume's thinking here may be that one's knowledge of what has been found to please across all countries and ages is necessarily incomplete, and that it is always possible for further discoveries to occasion expansions or alterations of the rules of beauty. Or it may be that even though many works please people in many different countries and ages, no single work will please people in all countries and ages. Though it's possible for rules to explain in a general way why some works please so broadly, if these rules were universal, then they would be falsified by the exceptional cases in which a widely beloved work fails to please in some country or age. Whatever interpretation we adopt, Hume's claim that the rules of beauty capture what has been found to please people across all countries and all ages has a distinctly egalitarian and cosmopolitan ring to it. The same is true for his claim that the sentiments that beautiful and deformed things arouse in us are, quote, the common sentiments of human nature, end quote. Hume believes that in virtue of our sentimental makeup, all of us, or just about all of us, are capable of responding with pleasure to beauty and responding with various forms of revulsion to what, as I've noted, he calls deformity. This is not to say that we are all equally good judges of beauty and deformity under all circumstances. Hume says that the, quote, finer emotions of the mind, that is, the sentiments that respond to beauty and deformity, are of a very tender and delicate nature and require the concurrence of many favorable circumstances to make them play with facility and exactness according to their general and established principles, end quote. For this to occur, one needs, quote, a perfect serenity of mind, a recollection of thought, a due attention to the object, end quote. All of these things might be disrupted by external hindrances or disorders. Pardon me. All of these things might be disrupted by external hindrances like unfavorable lighting or acoustics, or environmental distractions, or, on the other hand, by internal disturbances or disorders like preoccupation, excessive diffidence, or ill health. Although all of us are vulnerable to these hindrances, disturbances, and disorders, Hume says that we can correct for their influence by relying on the judgments of many people rather than the judgments of just one to determine which works are outstandingly beautiful. Pardon me. Because the hindrances, disturbances, or disorders that might distort the judgment of any given person will affect only a minority of the larger group, the judgments of the majority are more reliable. So the larger and more diverse the group, the more reliable its majority judgments will be. I think of this as a democratic thought about the reliability of judgments of taste, which complements the egalitarian and cosmopolitan notes in Hume's account of the rules of beauty. And again here, Hume says that the more extended in time and geography is the group of judges who assess the merits of a given work, the more likely it is to recognize the finest works, and the less likely it is to cherish works that merely seem beautiful due to the influence of authority, prejudice, or fashion. These factors may distort the tastes of a certain people at a certain moment, but their power tends to be localized in time and space. Likewise, the works of a real genius may be disparaged out of envy or jealousy, or even by familiar acquaintance with the genius. Quote, but when these obstructions are removed, the beauties which are naturally fitted to excite agreeable sentiments immediately display their energy, and while the world endures, they maintain their authority over the minds of men. End quote. This note perhaps sounds comforting, but we may just as well find it disturbing. It's comforting when it applies to cases in which we believe that it's unjust for feelings about the artist to affect the assessment of her works. But it's disturbing if we believe that in some cases it's right and good for feelings about the artist to affect the assessment of her works. If petty rivalry or prejudice mean little to audiences across borders and centuries, as Hume points out, neither does justifiable outrage at an artist's misdeeds. This is another flash of cosmopolitanism in Hume's thinking. The most beautiful works will find appreciative audiences beyond the reach of local prejudices against the artist, but also beyond the reach of legitimate local concerns about the artist. As I mentioned earlier, Hume rejects the view that judgments of taste are irreducibly subjective. The view that if I call something beautiful, all this can mean is that the work pleases me. And that if the same work displeases you, and you therefore call it deformed or bad, pardon me. It makes no sense to try to adjudicate between your judgment and mine because each judgment captures the truth of our respective feelings. We might expect that Hume rejects this view because he believes that beauty and deformity are features of objects rather than names for the sentiments that these objects arouse in us. Likewise, he might justify his position that there are rules of beauty and that we can have true or false judgments of taste on the grounds that beauty and deformity are there to be found in beautiful and deformed objects, say in the way that hydrogen is there to be found in water, or in the way that the ability to bear a heavy load is there to be found in a well-built bridge. This is not quite right, however. According to Hume, claims of the form, object O is beautiful because it has features X, Y, and Z can be true. But this observation is misleading if we treat it as the end of the story. Rather, possessing features X, Y, and Z makes the object beautiful because under favorable circumstances, objects with these features arouse the sentiments of pleasure that are possessed by all people. If humans' sentimental nature were sufficiently different from the way that it is, different objects would be beautiful. This is not the case with the hydrogen in water or the load-bearing capacity of a sound bridge. No matter how our sentimental nature changed, the hydrogen would still be in the water, and the well-built bridge would still be able to bear a load. To put the thought a different way, beauty is not in beautiful objects exactly. It's in the sentiments aroused in us by beautiful objects when we encounter these objects under favorable conditions. Hume offers a useful analogy to illustrate this thought. Judgments that particular objects are red can be true or false, and red objects are red because of certain properties that they have. But a true claim that an object is red means that it produces an impression of redness in someone who views it under the right circumstances. When seeing it in white light, say, and not in orange light, and when her eyes and organs of visual processing are not afflicted with any disorder that makes her call red what she calls orange when she's in good health. And for all of this, redness is not really in red objects, even if we often speak as if it is. Redness is what Hume calls a phantasm of the senses, or what we might call a sense impression. To perceive correctly that something is red is to have a certain sense impression that's produced by the right objects viewed under the right circumstances. Analogous claims hold for beauty. Judgments that particular objects are beautiful can be true or false, and beautiful objects are beautiful because of certain properties they have. But a true claim that an object is beautiful means that it produces certain sentiments of pleasure in people under the right circumstances. Beauty is not really in beautiful objects, even if we often speak as if it is. Rather, beauty is a kind of sentiment, produced by the right objects when we encounter them under the right circumstances. If similar sentiments are produced in someone by the wrong objects, or by the right objects under the wrong circumstances, Hume thinks of these as faulty sentiments of beauty. You might infer from what I've called the egalitarian, cosmopolitan, and democratic notes in his essay that Hume is also committed to the view that all people are equally good judges of taste, so long as they make their judgments under favorable circumstances. But on this point, Hume's thinking takes a decidedly elitist turn. With respect to outstandingly beautiful works, Hume puts his faith in the judgments of crowds. But he notes that beauty and deformity appear in many different degrees and are frequently mixed up together in the same work. And because the beauty or deformity of a given work can depend upon extremely complex arrangements of subtle features of the work, judgments of taste can be correspondingly complex and difficult to determine. Hume says that very few people are capable of making these determinations reliably. I will call such people expert critics. By my count, Hume stipulates that the expert critic must meet 10 requirements. She must possess what Hume calls delicate sense organs if she is to form judgments about any aesthetic object that has a sensory component. This leaves aside novels, for instance, or works of philosophy, which we can imagine someone with imperfect sense organs judging perfectly well. But to be an expert critic of dance or film or theater, for instance, requires good vision and good hearing. My video is stopped. Here we go. Okay. The expert critic must also possess what Hume calls delicacy of taste, which he treats as the internal equivalent of having delicate sense organs. Whereas having delicate sense organs means that our senses respond to all the fine details of the objects we perceive, having delicate taste means that our sentiments respond to all the fine points of what we take to be beauty and deformity in the impressions that our senses convey to our minds. Delicate organs of sight, for instance, make us sensitive to fine visual details. Delicacy of taste makes us sensitive to what we take to be beauty and deformity in the things we see. I say sensitive to what we take to be beauty and deformity in the things we see, because a person can have delicate taste without being a good judge of beauty and deformity. If someone possesses a taste that is delicate but immature, for instance, she's liable to be enchanted by works that she wrongly takes to be beautiful, and repulsed by works that she wrongly takes to be poorly made. Delicacy of taste is aesthetic sensitivity. It does not ensure that one's feelings respond accurately to what is beautiful and deformed. The fully formed expert critic, however, both possesses delicacy of taste and applies it accurately in judgments of taste. Hume says that when such a person encounters an aesthetic object, delicacy of taste, quote, allows the general principles of taste their full play and produces a feeling correspondent to those principles, end quote. That is, the expert critic's sentiments about any aesthetic object will be governed by the same principles that govern the pleasure that the majority of us take in the greatest works. But the expert critic's feelings will respond to the full array of every object's aesthetic qualities, both good and bad, as the feelings of the rest of us do not, since we generally lack the delicacy of taste that the expert critic possesses. To illustrate this thought, Hume borrows an image from chapter 13 of the second part of Don Quixote, where Sancho Panza reveals that he can tell the vintage of a wine just by smelling or tasting it. But that's no wonder, Sancho boasts to his companion, because two of my forebears on my father's side were the finest judges of wine that La Mancha has known for many a long year. And as a proof, I'm going to tell you about what happened to them once. The two of them were given some wine from a barrel to taste and asked for their opinion about its condition and quality, whether it was good wine or bad. One of them tasted it with the tip of his tongue and all the other did was lift it to his nose. The first one said the wine tasted of iron, and the second one said it tasted more of cordovan leather. The winemaker said the barrel was clean and that nothing had been added to the wine to make it taste of either iron or leather. But the two famous wine judges stuck to their guns. Time passed, the wine was sold, and when they cleared out the barrel, they found a tiny little key on a thong of cordovan leather. Hume says that delicacy of taste is like the ability of Sancho's forebears to detect the iron of the key and the leather of the thong, mingled with the other flavors of the wine. That is, delicacy of taste enables one to respond with feeling to every beauty or blemish of an object, to every feature of a work that naturally pleases or displeases us, no matter how subtle a feature it is. If, in addition to possessing delicate taste, one is able to explain to another person how the rules of beauty apply to an object, this is like being able to produce the key with the leather thong. Like the key, explanations of the rules of beauty serve to justify judgments of taste that others might reject or might be unable to make themselves. A person can form judgments of taste that accord with the rules of beauty, even if she's unable to articulate these reasons, Hume suggests. But the person who can explain how these rules underwrite a judgment of taste can thereby persuade others that this judgment is correct. How does someone with delicate taste become capable of exercising it accurately? Okay, I lost my video. One moment, please. Hume says that, pardon me, I'm going to start that sentence over. How does someone with delicate taste become capable of exercising it accurately? Hume says that she needs a good deal of experience, and experience of different kinds. She needs to get to know at least one kind of artwork, along with the varieties of beauty that appear in this kind of work, so well that she's able to distinguish between good and bad instances of this kind of work in the way that its makers do. Hume's thought here seems to be that the developing critic must, for instance, read many different novels and attend to the beauties of language and dialogue and characterization and plot structure in a wide range of them, until she comes to understand what makes for good and bad language, dialogue, characterization, and plot structure in the way that accomplished novelists do. The developing critic needs breadth of experience as well as depth. She has to spend time comparing beautiful works of different kinds and works that are beautiful in varying degrees and proportions. That is, she needs experience comparing novels with poems, tapestries with sculptures, histories with pieces of oratory, and so forth. And she needs to compare works that succeed and fail in various ways. In accumulating this breadth of experience, Hume notes that it is especially useful for the developing critic to spend time with works that are admired in different countries and different ages. If one lacks such experience, one is liable to admire what Hume calls, quote, the most frivolous beauties rather than, the most frivolous beauties, such as rather merit the name of defects, end quote. Pause my video. There we go. Okay. Finally, no matter how well developed her sensibilities, a critic needs repeated encounters with any work about which she forms settled judgment. Given the complexity of the task and the variability of our moods, even the expert critic will be wary of leaping to judgments about any given work, no matter how sharp her first impressions may be. Beyond delicacy of taste and experience, the expert critic needs an outstanding intellect. Otherwise, it's impossible for her to hold in mind the many aspects of a work that are relevant to appreciating it, or for her to assess the judgments or chains of reasoning by which an artist has fashioned a given work. On this point, Hume invites us to think of a tragic poet trying to write a plausible character. In addition to taste and creativity, a good tragic poet needs fine judgment in order to create insightful and lifelike portrayals of her character's thinking, speaking, and acting. In order to judge the poet's work along these lines, the critic must also have fine judgment, and for the same reasons. Hume adds that what he calls the highest and most excellent beauties are the beauties of design and reason, and that our ability to appreciate these beauties depends primarily on our intellects rather than on sentiment or experience. Hume doesn't spell out exactly what he means by the beauties of design and reason, but I suspect that a Euclidean proposition, a powerful theory, or an elegant feat of engineering would qualify as examples. The expert critic also requires good sense, a virtue of the intellect, in order to resist the influence of prejudice. Hume characterizes prejudice as a, quote, perversion of natural sentiment, end quote, which occurs when one's manners or opinions interfere with one's appreciation of a given work of art. If a work is at odds with the manners and opinions that prevail in a certain place and time, those who are affected by prejudice are liable to dismiss the work just on these grounds. If, on the other hand, a work is especially congenial to the manners and opinions of a certain place and time, those who are affected by prejudice are liable to embrace the work just on these grounds. For instance, different peoples tend to have different customary manners and opinions with respect to courtship and marriage. That is, they will have different senses of what's good and bad, appropriate and inappropriate, or admirable and shameful when it comes to courtship and marriage. Different kinds of love songs may therefore accord with the customary manners and opinions of each people. But accordance or discordance of this kind is not a sound basis for judgments of taste, Hume suggests, even though it commonly influences them. Love songs that portray or rely upon manners or opinions that are different from my own might seem strange to me, but Hume says that in order to judge these songs correctly, I need to neutralize any aversion to them that arises in me just because they seem strange. The same is true for manners and opinions of all kinds. An expert critic will not enjoy a work any the less just because the manners and opinions that she encounters in it are different from her own. In addition to the manners and opinions of peoples, prejudices may derive from the private opinions of an individual critic. If I like or dislike a particular artist on personal grounds, for instance, then I fall victim to prejudice to the extent to which my feelings about the artist determine my feelings about her work. Good sense, a virtue of the intellect, enables a critic to resist feelings and judgments that arise out of prejudice so that a work may produce sentiments of beauty or deformity in proportion to its merits and defects alone. Thus far, Hume is striking another cosmopolitan note with his account of prejudice. We can only make accurate judgments of taste if we shield them from the influence of our peculiar manners and opinions and allow each work to arouse the sentiments within us that are common to all people. But this is not meant to imply that judgments of taste become inaccurate if they're informed by any particular manners or opinions. Hume notes that an expert critic must take into account the audience to which a work is addressed and must assume the point of view of this audience while she experiences and judges the work. By way of example, Hume invites us to consider a work of oratory, which must inevitably aim to persuade a particular audience with its own particular manners and opinions. This work won't affect us in the right way, and nor can we assess its quality unless we inhabit the mindset of the audience to which it was addressed. So although the successful critic's sentimental response to beauty and deformity derives from sentiments that belong to all people, and although she prevents her own manners and opinions from interfering with the operations of these sentiments, she judges correctly only if she imagines herself encountering the work as one of its intended audience members would. Her sentiment is universal, but her perspective must, in this respect, be as localized as that of the intended audience. This demand that the critic assume the perspective of the work's intended audience becomes increasingly formidable the further one is in time, place, or culture from this audience. It's likely an ideal to which a critic might aspire rather than a requirement that any critic can claim to have met definitively. But any critic who can credibly claim expertise in judging the beauty or deformity of works that are at all remote from their own time, place, and culture must be able to draw from a deep well of knowledge and experience. Notably, although Hume says that we judge correctly only if we make allowances for differences in manners and opinions, he denies that we have an analogous duty to allow for differences in morals and sense of decency. If a work treats as right and good what I judge to be wrong and evil, or the reverse, then to the extent that it does so, Hume thinks I can't enjoy the work and should therefore judge it to be defective. He cites as an example Homer's portrayals of characters who are inhumane and indecent as virtuous. Hume clearly loves and admires Homer's poems, but he enjoys them less because of what he takes to be their moral blemishes, and his judgment aligns with his sentiments. What is the difference between, on the one hand, the features of a work that the expert critic will ascribe to the manners and opinions of an artist or audience, and therefore accommodate as fully as she can so as to avoid the trap of prejudice, and on the other hand, the features of a work that the expert critic will identify as moral failures and therefore treat as defects? That is a very tricky question, and any attempt to answer it here would take me too far from the topic of this lecture. But suffice it to say that Hume believes that drawing this distinction is possible and that the expert critic will now know how to do it where she must. So there you have it, the 10 requirements on the expert critic. For anyone who aspires to be an expert critic, this must be an intimidating list. And it isn't difficult to see why Hume thinks that not many people can meet all of these requirements. As he puts it, another slide. Though the principles of taste be universal and nearly, if not entirely, the same in all men, yet few are qualified to give judgment on any work of art or establish their own sentiment as the standard of beauty. And in fact, Hume ultimately puts his faith in the sentiments of no one critic alone, but declares that the joint verdict of expert critics, wherever they be found, is the true standard of taste and beauty. Just as he maintains that the majority of people are good judges of the greatest beauties, even if any one person might misjudge them, so Hume believes that the judgments of no single expert critic can serve as the standard of taste, but only the shared judgments of expert critics. In both cases, Hume trusts the judgments of the group more than those of the individual. Assuming that we accept the claim that the joint verdict of expert critics is the true standard of taste, how do we identify expert critics? Well, Hume has surely advanced our ability to do so by offering us a theory of the expert critic's essential characteristics. But he also says that identifying any one critic as an expert is a laborious process, if a relatively intuitive one. First, we should presume that there is a true standard of taste and that some of us are able to judge in accordance with it. Then we should put ourselves to the test, comparing, defending, and evaluating our particular judgments of taste until we recognize someone whose judgments appear to be supremely reliable. Hume doesn't make this task out to be an easy one, but he believes that we can succeed at it. He recognizes that when we consider the matter in a general way, we're liable to doubt that the sentiments of a small group of people could provide a stable criterion for distinguishing between beauty and deformity, and that the rest of us would be able to recognize the members of this group if they were among us. But he thinks that we should resist this intuition. After all, we often have the opposite intuition when it comes to abstract reasoning. Although we may doubt that sentiment could provide a basis for reliable aesthetic judgments, we tend to be far more confident that there are clear criteria for assessing arguments. Nevertheless, as Hume points out, systems of philosophy or theology have often predominated for long periods during which nothing could seem more certain to their adherents. But however long they endure, these systems inevitably undergo periodic revolutions, whereas great works of art maintain their appeal for generations after generation. To illustrate the point, Hume contrasts the appeal of Plato and Aristotle with that of Homer and Virgil. For hundreds of years after the two philosophers lived, there were great numbers of Platonists and Aristotelians, people who subscribe to many views of Plato's and Aristotle's that practically no one believes any longer. However broadly we might benefit from reading Plato and Aristotle, there really aren't Platonists or Aristotelians any longer in the way that there were for many centuries. But the poems of Homer and Virgil can take hold of anyone who reads them in something very close to the way that they did in the days of Platonists and Aristotelians. Hume doesn't make the same point with respect to natural science, but I'm going to make it for him. However certain we feel about criteria regarding the truth of scientific theories, a great scientific text is less likely to strike a natural scientist as thoroughgoingly true centuries after it was written than is a great work of art to strike a person with fine aesthetic sense as thoroughgoingly beautiful centuries after its creation. Hence, contemporary biologists don't generally train by reading Aristotle, or physicists by reading Newton, or chemists by reading Lavoisier, even if their names and theories still occupy a modest place in courses of professional education in these fields. But there are exceedingly few contemporary poets who haven't read Homer or Virgil. And I'd wager that for many centuries to come, practically no successful author of fiction in English verse or prose will have made it to maturity without having read Shakespeare. All of this tends to support Hume's point. The enduring and cross-cultural appeal of the finest works of art suggests that they produce a kind of pleasure that all, or practically all of us, are capable of feeling. If great numbers of us experience these works as beautiful, despite our manifold cultural and psychological differences, this should give us hope that we can identify expert critics. They will be the few among us who can express what it is about these works that pleases us so much. And especially if they can articulate the rules of beauty, like one who can produce the key on the thong of cordovan leather. They will be able to extend our tastes in subtle ways that we can acknowledge as sound, even if we lack their expertise. Having now presented Hume's views, let me conclude with some reflections about how I find Hume useful to think with on these matters. Let me begin with Hume's basic theses. Some works of art are better than others. Intelligible reasons can be given as to why one work is better than another. And these reasons can be exceedingly complex. Some people are better than others at discerning and articulating these reasons. Their skill depends on a combination of sense perception, sentiment, intellect, imagination, and knowledge. And this skill is cultivated through experiences of the kinds that Hume describes. Where these theses are controversial, my own experiences have made them seem more plausible rather than less. Many times I've come to see the great beauty of works of art that used to do nothing for me, and works that once thrilled me have come to seem unexceptional or even seriously flawed. In the majority of such cases, what seems to me to be the right explanation is that my tastes have matured rather than that they've simply changed. If I could spend some time with my younger self, working carefully through the reasons for our different judgments of taste, although I don't think I could effect any sudden revolution in him, I feel as assured as one can feel about such things that I could bring him meaningfully closer to perceiving, feeling, and thinking in the way that I do now. I feel this assurance primarily because I've experienced minor conversions of this kind firsthand on many occasions when other people have helped to shape my tastes through conversation. My students and colleagues, my favorite critics, my closest friends and relations. It's my good fortune regularly to be able to read, see, and hear the same works as they do, to learn how these works affect them, to trade observations that deepen our sense of what's there in the works, and to formulate together the fullest account we can manage of why exactly these works succeed and fail. Exchanges of this kind have convinced me that some people's sense organs and tastes are delicate in ways that mine are just not, and that some people's judgments are often wiser than mine. They've also convinced me that other people can help train me by degrees to perceive, think, and feel as they do. Spending time talking with people who can do this has altered my judgments about particular works and has profoundly shaped my tastes. This kind of experience has also made me appreciate why, although he dedicates much of the standard of taste to considering the qualities and education of the expert critic, apart from her converse with other critics, Hume ultimately designates the standard of taste as the joint verdict of many such critics. Although people's judgments may often converge, and although through conversation and shared experience, skillful critics can bring one another to share their respective feelings and judgments, the range of artwork that rewards serious attention is overwhelmingly vast, and the experiences, cultures, knowledge bases, and sensibilities of skilled critics will be as diverse as the works that they judge. As a result, no single critic, however talented or versatile, can ever serve as an adequate judge of artworks of all kinds or from all places and ages. Hume is right to stress that tradition can rescue us to some extent from the sheer enormity of the task of finding and learning how to appreciate the greatest works. It becomes obvious to most of us who spend time with great books, for instance, that a canon is more reliable than its unpretentious cousin, the best of list. And Hume's explanation of this fact seems a reasonable one. Whereas a work may become highly regarded in one place or at one time, mainly because it's especially congenial to the manners and opinions of its audience, a work is generally canonized only if it's deemed exceptionally worthy by people across borders and long stretches of time. People whose manners and opinions differ a good deal, and therefore cannot account for their common appreciation of the work. Hume also captures well the value of studying a canon as a foundational course of training for taste, as a basic program, as it were. Engaging firsthand with a collection of supremely beautiful works, works whose complexity ensures that they will disclose their beauties in proportion to the care that their audiences take with them, usually suffices to persuade us that this engagement can help us appreciate works of all kinds, and makes plain to us how demanding the work of appreciation can be. But although Hume offers a reasonably thorough account of the value of a canon, I think he underplays the obstacles to arranging and maintaining a canon. I suspect that Hume is right to say that the larger and more diverse an audience any great work can find, the likelier is its beauty to be appreciated. If so, then this fact seems to me to depend upon a process that contributes meaningfully to what George Eliot calls, in the last sentence of Middlemarch, quote, the growing good of the world, end quote. When some of us find a work exceedingly beautiful, we direct others to it and help them appreciate it. And those others do the same for others, and they do the same for others. And if the beauty of the work is so great that it survives transmission across expanses of space, time, and culture, this cycle tends to expand ever outward. But it's that middle part, the transmission across space, time, and culture, that worries me. For the lines of transmission have to be built, and there's no one to build them but human beings. Consider Hume's observation that an adequate assessment of a work is possible only if one understands the work's context, the form to which the work belongs, the manners and opinions of its intended audience, and the work's cultural and historical background. This kind of understanding does not come easily. Shakespeare's English might be sufficiently similar to ours that, with patient study and guidance from devoted scholars, you and I can come to appreciate the beauties of his works. But without the study and the guidance, he might as well be writing in a foreign language. Likewise, I found Plato's works beautiful enough that I wanted to spend years writing a dissertation about them. Maybe not quite as many years as I actually did spend writing the dissertation, but I'll leave that aside. In any case, had Plato's dialogues not been translated into English, or had they not been assigned to me by a string of professors who devoted much of their lives to understanding them, it's unlikely that I'd have caught even a glimpse of these dialogues' great beauty. As it happens, we have a surfeit of scholars of Shakespeare and Plato who can, with the support of universities, publishers, libraries, and so forth, draw us into intimate contact with their works. But the access to great works that networks of scholars, teachers, universities, publishers, and libraries makes possible must always be a matter of some contingency. What's more, every node in these networks, including the reading public, is influenced by all the others, for good and for ill. Even if there are expert critics like the ones that Hume describes, then they, just like the rest of us, have to rely upon networks of this kind for the starting points of their tastes. Even their paths to at least some of the greatest books are therefore liable to become overgrown, since these paths are largely maintained by imperfect critics, people with all of the characteristic defects that Hume mentions, insufficient knowledge or sympathetic imagination, for instance, or prejudices against manners and opinions that differ from their own. Of course, it was always going to be thus, as it is with all human institutions. Canons of great books are never complete sets of all of the greatest beauties that have ever been written and bound, and nor could any canon maintain itself in this condition if it ever once achieved it. These limitations don't make me doubt the value of great books, having found them to be an inexhaustible source of beauty. But a canon can only offer us the first word on questions of which books are great, never the final word. Any canon relies on its keepers, you and I, not only to make the already canonized works live in our thoughts and conversation, but to search as well as we can for the other works that might be among them. This is an infinite task. It requires sufficient ruggedness and initiative to traverse those great expanses of time, space, and culture, and to submit ourselves repeatedly to works whose meaning and value we must be unsure of for as long as it takes us to become worthy judges of them. On the other hand, this task need not be carried out by solitary experts, and nor should it be. Although we can't discern the beauty of unfamiliar books ahead of time, or fix the standards by which they should be judged, Hume is right to claim that if these books are beautiful in a way that we can't see, other people who do see their beauty can help us to do the same. He's also right that we become capable of receiving this help by spending time with the books that we already know are great. Thank you. Okay, I think it's time for me to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah, for a lovely talk. And let me get myself sorted out here. We have a bunch of questions that came in through the chat, so I'm going to try to take them in order, and hopefully we'll be able to get to quite a few of them. So let's see, I'm going to start with Sheila Barrett asks, can you discuss Hume's view that beauty is what pleases, with philosophers like Etienne Gilson who posit truth as a necessary condition of beauty?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to say anything of Etienne Gilson because I've never heard of Etienne Gilson, but maybe that's another great book waiting for me to discover. So who posit truth as a condition of beauty. So it seems like Hume just denies that truth is a condition of beauty if we take that to mean that the literal truth of, say, the sentences in a novel, for instance, is a condition of their beauty. On the other hand, I think he would say that what he calls the beauties of the reason and design are beautiful to the extent to which they're true, although perhaps there are other criteria as to why those beauties might count as beauties. Perhaps they're ingenious without being true, or very clever without being true in some cases. So I think Hume has room for deploying truth as one criterion for the beauty of a work, among others. But I don't think he would say that all works have to be true or be true in all respects in order to be beautiful, or that truth is the sole criterion of beauty, or that truth and beauty are synonymous. True and beautiful are synonymous terms. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a question from Kenneth Berg. According to Hume, what is an individual's obligation to conform his or her sensations regarding an object's beauty or deformity, which are contrary to the expert's judgment that the object is beautiful or deformed?
What an excellent question. I would love to know Hume's views about that. I have no idea. I mean, Hume says that there are great benefits to individuals in by various means trying to become as like expert critics in their aesthetic judgments as possible. Hume says in another lovely essay called "Of the Delicacy of Taste and Passion," I might be getting the title slightly wrong, that people with delicate tastes, which is to say with tastes that are similar to the experts in this respect, and therefore likely, at least with judgments as set of works of art that are as sensitive as the judgments of expert critics, can spend all their time with beautiful things, because that's one part of your life that you can control. You can surround yourself with works of beauty, and among those Hume counts wonderful friends to have urbane, pleasant conversations with, and that's just a really nice way to spend your life. But I'm not sure that he treats it as a duty exactly. He doesn't speak of any duties to cultivate our aesthetic tastes. So it's a really interesting question.
Well, this one, let's see. The next one is from Martin Lay. Does Hume address the sublime in his exploration of taste?
That's an interesting question. If he does, he doesn't do it in this essay, but I think there's a reasonably good chance that he does in another one of his handful of essays on aesthetics. And if so, where that passage is escaping me. He might address the sublime without calling it the sublime is another option that's occurring to me, but I'm honestly not sure. This is one of the great things about Hume and many authors who write in English whose works are very old is that all of his works have no copyright protection. So they're available online. You can search them. I will go after this lecture and do a Control F search and look for sublime, looking through his text online and see what turns up. But it's a good question.
Well, next we have one from Ilian Sandberg. Does Hume distinguish between strictly matters of taste, like food, from works that strive to have effects larger than pleasure, namely the arts?
So my sense of his treatment of food, that's a good question. Does he talk a huge amount about food? I think he does. And he says that, when you taste a food, you're not discovering, well, no, I think he would say you are discovering some truth about how the food affects human taste in the ordinary sense in which we use that word, not aesthetic taste, but taste like what we feel with our tongues. But he seems to think that differences in matters of taste in that sense can't be resolved. So he treats these different kinds of taste with your tongue and aesthetic taste more generally as different in that respect. The judgments of taste in aesthetic matters can be true and false, can be adjudicated by expert critics, whereas matters of differences of taste when it comes to the taste that we have with our tongue cannot be so adjudicated.
Next, we have Thomas Ayopoulos says, I assume Hume would say that the moral defects of the artist should not weigh in the balance as we evaluate the beauty of the work itself.
Yeah, he does seem to think that, although his view, interestingly, so most people who hold that view, I think also say that moral blemishes of works should be looked past, at least in many cases. But Hume does not think that that's right. He thinks we should reserve our sense of morals and decency as relevant to the judgment of works, so long as elements within any given work are immoral or indecent in some respect. But the immorals or indecency of the artist, he says, should not affect our judgments of the beauty or deformity of the work.
Let's see, Susan Kentner asks, what would Hume think about Horace's definition of poetry, which is to instruct and to delight? Would Hume say that art should not only provide pleasure or delight, but also instruct or edify us?
That's a really good question, and Hume has a clear answer for it, and I wish I could remember it. I'm pretty sure that he says, so there's this one tiny little sentence in of the Standard of Taste in which Hume gives 3 examples. He says, history, I believe poetry, and one other art form, rhetoric or oratory, each has a function. And I'm pretty sure that he says that the function of poetry is to delight or please. So there you have it, not to instruct, but to please, although that seems like a weird thought about poetry. Surely poetry can instruct in some cases. It can do a whole lot of other things. So I'm not sure that Hume would be committed to the view that the only function of poetry is to delight, but he certainly avows explicitly that the function of poetry, one function among others perhaps, is to delight. Good question.
Let's see, we've got a couple time for some more. Susan Yohes, I think I'm saying her name right. How would Hume, or you, based on your knowledge of Hume, advise us to, quote, adjust our opinions of works of art in light of the opinions of expert critics? Don't they help us return to a work with a greater openness to the work's good aspects?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I take it, Hume's thought is we should try to find the expert critics, hear one another out, by talking about various things that we take to be beautiful and deformed, to stretch out our conversations about those things so that they become as precise as we can make them, to really figure out what it is about different works that makes us feel the way that they do. He says, you know, expert critics are going to be able to point out subtle features of each work that the rest of us don't notice on our first encounter, or even on reflection. But I take it the more we listen to an expert critic, carefully making their way through why a particular work affects them the way that it does, the more expert critics can train us to imitate them by degrees. Sort of like the way that, you know, theorists train us to do theory by, if we read a whole bunch of their theory, or people who write eloquently or speak eloquently train us to be eloquent by reading or listening to a lot of what they say. So there's a kind of osmosis. I'm not sure Hume says exceedingly clearly how this works, but it's roughly something like that, I believe.
This next one is more a question of fact. Shani Stepakov says, in your excerpt from Cervantes concerning tasting the wine, was the character who tasted it more sensitively Sancho Panza or Don Quixote?
Oh, neither. Hi, Shani, by the way, thanks for coming. So this is tricky. So just before the passage I read, it's revealed for what reason. Well, my Don Quixote students and I talked about this a good deal, and people had some really interesting thoughts, but it's not completely obvious. Sancho Panza turns out to be good at determining the varietal of wine and its origin, but he had these forebears, these ancestors, so not Don Quixote or himself, who were expert judges of the taste of wine. Those are the 2 people in the story that Sancho boasts about.
Okay, Elizabeth Brown asks, I have a question about Hume's statement that universal taste is possible. In all of Hume's examples, did he describe or analyze any non-Western works? And who was the intended audience for Hume's work at the time of publication in terms of class, gender, race? How does that impact the applicability of Hume in our present day?
He does have some passing judgments about non-Western works. All of the works that he mentions are religious works, and so his purposes for discussing them are like pretty narrow. And my recollection is they are not as charitable as they should be. Hume, a lot of people suspected that Hume was an atheist, but that he couldn't reveal as much during his lifetime. His great work on religion, or his greatest work on religion, was published posthumously, and I believe against the advice of most of his closest friends, that he published it at least during his lifetime. So when he talks about religious texts, it's almost always to disparage or to say that any considerations about religious views should be irrelevant to our consideration of the beauty of the work. What I would say is that even if Hume does not talk about non-Western texts, he's committed to the view, whether he knows it or not, that it's incumbent on any expert critic to search out those texts and try to learn which ones are beautiful and deformed and why. That submitting oneself to texts that are belong to a different culture or people from a different place or time is a means of refining your sense generally of what makes for beauty and deformity. So an essential process for becoming a good critic, for understanding what beauty is, basically, and deformity.
Great. Let's see, a couple more, I think. Ilian Sandberg asks, isn't there a danger in emphasizing the canon in that it might prejudice us toward the same type of work? Isn't this sort of a vicious cycle?
Of course. Yeah, I think there's the danger of that cycle is there no matter which works we encounter. I mean, I take it Hume's view is that we're on safer grounds with canons because the prejudices that might have contributed to judgment of them as especially good are sanded down or corrected for the more widely the group of people who whose judgments underwrite their canonization. In other words, the more spread out in time, space, and culture, the people who contribute to making a canon of works canonized, the less dangerous that prejudice might have determined the contents of that canon. But of course, you're right, and I think this is similar to a worry that I was voicing at the end. Canons, like any works that somebody encounters, can prejudice someone who reveres them unduly or takes them to be the final word on what's good rather than the first word. So I think I'm sympathetic to this worry.
Let's see, this next one is more of a statement, so I'm going to leave that one and go to the next one. Susan Lippman asks, what do you mean by tradition, or how do you define tradition when you say it is essential?
So I think what I know, the slide is off my screen at this moment, but I think what I said is something like tradition can rescue us from the enormity of the sort of sea of beautiful works that are out there that any expert critic needs to be able to piece through in order to find the greatest works, or that any even ordinary critic needs to piece through. The tradition narrows the range of the starting points, the places as to where we can start. So what I meant by tradition was the accumulated judgments of people from various times, places, and cultures, at least ideally, that contribute to designating certain kinds of works, certain works as the greatest works. So tradition sets us up with a set. Start here. These are the greatest works that people have believed, are judged as the greatest over the course of a long time.
I think we got time for one more. So Ira Pilchin asks, Hume's views as you describe them seem fairly self-evident to me. What was it about his work that adores or makes it path-breaking to this day?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. Maybe you're a Humean, Ira. These views are controversial. I think you'd find a lot of people who do work in aesthetics who disagree with them. And I think there are a lot of points at which it's totally fine to jump off, but Hume is, I find him useful to wrestle with, even where you disagree with him. So in what ways was this path breaking? Well, I'm afraid that question is really, really hard for me to answer because I don't know a huge amount about Hume's intellectual context. I'm an imperfect critic of this essay by Hume's own terms. If I really wanted to see its beauty, I take it I'd have to know a huge amount about mid-18th century aesthetic theory. This was a moment at which there were a whole number of theorists who were trying their hand at aesthetics. A lot of their views, are the kinds of things you'd read in a course for specialists, but not the kinds of things that are read very regularly. So they haven't reached a generalist like me who samples very broadly in the way that students in the basic program do. So very good question. I would love to know more about it. If you come up with an answer, Ira, please be in touch.
All right, well, that does bring us to our time. So I just want to say thank you to Noah for a lovely presentation and for answering all of our questions. I know we didn't get to quite all of them, but we got to quite a few. And I will give everyone a chance to unmute and to give a round of applause to Noah for his lovely presentation.
Thank you very much.
So,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
hopefully
Thank
we'll
you.
see you at the next lecture. So,
Thank
Thank you very much.
good
See you
afternoon.
again, Noah. Thank
Bye-bye.
And the speaker, whoever's making noise gets to have their picture.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Zoe, I'm going to end the meeting then.
All righty, Jan. Let me
Okay.
pause the recording.